if you think about a rural nurse trying to get her CEUs, she has to take a day off work, maybe even two, drive into an urban center to go to a class. The cost to not just the nurse, but the community and the facility is ridiculous.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. My name's Kevin McFarland, and I'm, of course, your host. Thanks for downloading this episode, and thanks as always for listening to the podcast. Just in case you didn't know, I also have a second podcast that I do with Dr. Lisa Wolf called How Not to Kill Your Patient. If you haven't downloaded it yet, check it out. I think you're going to really dig it. This podcast focuses more on clinical topics and about keeping your patient alive in the emergency department. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do so today. Remember, you can leave a rating and review for both podcasts in the Apple Podcast Player or on most podcast players. It's a great way to help the podcast out at absolutely no cost to you. Helps people like you find this podcast. My guest today is a longtime pediatric ER nurse, a nurse educator, and a nursing community champion. Fun fact, my guest was my very first nursing preceptor and has had a huge impact on my own practice as a nurse. You guys are going to love this episode with my friend, Sara.
So I'm Sara, and as you can tell from the accent, I'm not from around here, but I have actually been in New Mexico longer than any other place I've ever lived. So I've been here, I've been in the States just over 30 years, and I've been in New Mexico for coming up on 28 years.
A long time.
It is a very long time.
That pretty much makes you New Mexican, even if you have that funny accent.
I do eat green chili and everything, so
Yeah,
I'm mayor.
that's funny.
And I was lucky enough I was already a nurse when I came to the US. I came over as a traveler. And when I came to New Mexico, I was lucky enough to find my perfect dream job, working in the pediatric emergency room at UNMH, so University of New Mexico, with you.
Yes, ma'am. So what the audience probably doesn't know is that you were my first nursing preceptor. When I first became a nurse, I started in the pediatric ER, and Sara got to be the one to teach me how to be a nurse, and has affected my practice in more ways than I could probably ever repay her for, and taught me the appreciation of being a good nurse and a good peds nurse. For you, I'll forever be grateful for that.
Thank you. Oh, I'm blushing, but you can't see that.
But truly, some of the things that probably a lot of the things I still do as a nurse go back to my time in the peds ER. So.
Yeah. And I have to say, that time in the peds ER was a magical, unbelievable time. We were a small unit. It was unbelievably family. I think when you were there, we were up to 8 nurses?
It wasn't many. And I think when I came in, I think the newest nurse there, I think there were 2 new nurses there that were like just over a year, but most of the crew had been 2-3 years there. And like, truly, they were like family. They were like it was a very close-knit group. And it felt kind of weird being the new guy, even though I wasn't a new guy at the hospital. I was a new guy in the unit and the only guy. I was like the token male.
Yeah, it was just an amazing time. And I look back and I felt we didn't even have our own space. We were moving in and out of clinics depending on when they opened and when they closed. And we just made do and had an amazing time and did amazing work.
Yeah.
With very little. We were literally in clinic rooms that didn't have oxygen and suction, running an ER.
Yep.
Stupid stuff like that you wouldn't even imagine.
Yeah, it's crazy to look back now and think to myself, like, holy cow, they did some pretty cool work. They did some pretty cool work there. So
yeah.
It was a cool time.
Yeah. I don't think it can ever be repeated just because of the circumstances and the people and everything. It all just fell into place. And it was an amazing team, an amazing family. But it got me working with Dr. Robert CPEN, doing a lot of his research. And at the time, his research was predominantly around school nursing. And he actually did an amazing study on the difference between responses for emergency nurses and school nurses. I don't know if you ever did any of it, but what he did is he gave us these scenarios and took us to a room, and you walked in and you were expected to go. And he did the same video and the same scenario for school nurses.
Huh.
But long and short of it was that the school nurses had amazing scene safety, but once they got to the patient, they were unsure what to do. So that's his work. Then really started working on supporting those rural school nurses. But the ER nurses, we all seem to die on the way to the patient.
One of the things, and this from my EMS background, one of the things that we always drilled into people in EMS was always the scene safety was
Yeah.
always a big thing. That aspect of it. And that's something that I think a lot of nurses don't think about. They always think that their
Yeah.
ER is always going to be safe and fine and
Yeah.
good and no one's going to be there to hurt them, which hopefully is always true, but isn't always true. And I think the EMS people a lot of people go into EMS and then become emergency nurses, like they're pretty good at that, but there's a lot of people that aren't.
Yeah. I do believe Dr. Sapien has a video of me paddling through some water to go and rescue my electrocuted patient.
That's a bad sign.
Yeah.
I used to love doing scenarios with that in EMS. When I taught EMS, you do a scenario and like they roll the patient over and they'd see a gun and they'd just take the gun and just put it to the side. And I'm like, oh no. And you're like, okay, now you're dead. Scenario's over.
Yeah. So with that, I started doing some work with him with his HRSA grants and EMSC, New Mexico EMS for Children. And it's just grown from there. So I'm really lucky because I've tagged along for the ride and it's just amazingly grown from that. I've done a lot of the car seat safety, and we turned the department into a car seat distribution site. So we were able to replace all of the car seats after accidents because at that time, most of the staff were trained up as car seat technicians, so we could do the car seat, and it was really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
With each of the steps, it's just pulled me further and further into the world and looking at rural facilities and rural communities, the difference between what we have here in a big urban center versus what the rest of New Mexico and quite a few other states has.
Yeah, like New Mexico, like many states, is a very rural state where there's 3 or 4 big city centers, but then there's a lot of places where there's ERs out in the middle of nowhere where like they may not be a trauma center, but they're going to get the trauma because they're the only hospital for, 50 miles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, yeah, 50 miles, not even that. Looking at Northern Navajo, which is the facility I've done a lot of work with, and they're 215 miles from Albuquerque.
holy cow, that's a long ways. So even if they're not a trauma center, they're going to be the one to get the traumas that happen in their community.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think on that score, I think a lot of the nurses in these big urban trauma centers, we all have those moments when we're a little jaded and they get that trauma patient that's come from an outlying facility and it's a hot mess and you're stood there. I've had those moments where I'm like, you've seen the nurse or the resident or the tech or someone rolling their eyes that they've only got the one IV or whatever. But this sudden realize, I'm like, look around you. You have
All the
an
resources.
you have an RT, you have an attending, you have a trauma surgeon, you have 2 nurses, you've got a paramedic. I'm like, the facility that sent this patient doesn't have that many staff on the best of days.
Yeah.
And they managed to keep this patient alive and get them to you. So, you know, applaud what they managed to do, not roll your eyes at what they didn't achieve.
100%.
And looking at that type of thing really made me think about how can we support these rural communities.
You spent a good part of your career supporting those facilities, those smaller communities in New Mexico on their pediatric care, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Dr. Sapien and his Child Ready, we have a virtual pediatric emergency room and the EMSC for children. We've gone out to these communities and we offer a variety of modalities. We offer like a virtual pediatric emergency room so that they can like basically zoom in and get that like drive-by consult. You think about it when you're in the ER, you're like, hey, what do you think about this x-ray? What do you see? What do you think about this dose? These rural communities don't have that. And this program offers that as an option.
That's very cool. So they can just zoom in and get a pediatric emergency specialist.
Yeah. Yeah. And just have the, hey, what do you think? It doesn't have to be, we're shipping you this patient or anything. It's just that drive by, hey, what do you think? I'm tired. I'm unsure, not quite sure which way to go. And
Yeah.
the idea is that there's no like guilt or recriminations on the fact that you're asking this. It's support, which I think is amazing.
That is amazing. It's amazing that they have that as an option for the community. That's
Yeah.
just incredible. So what an incredible thing to have for the outlying communities that they're getting these kids anyway.
Yeah.
And I think every ER nurse can relate to the fact that if you're not a peds ER nurse, when a peds comes in, like your heart rate's going a little bit faster, you're a little bit more unsure, you're double, triple, quadruple checking everything just because you're like, it's not your usual thing. So
Yeah.
you really, I think most ER nurses get a little anxious anyway,
Yeah. If you're not anxious, there's something wrong with you.
right?
We thrive on that adrenaline. That's why we're ER nurses, isn't
Yep.
it?
That is absolutely true. Absolutely
Yeah.
true.
And
So
so with that portion of it, we realized that there was some missing education as well. So that's the big thing that I have worked on. There's a number of facets to it. One of them is that if you think about a rural nurse trying to get her CEUs, she has to take a day off work, maybe even two, drive into an urban center to go to a class. The cost to not just the nurse, but the community and the facility is ridiculous. So I started offering education to a number of facilities, and it was basically on their timeline. So they could say, third Wednesday at 7 a.m., and I would log in, they would give me a topic that they were interested in, or I would pick a topic and we'd do an hour's education and they'd get one CE.
good for you. That's what a great way to support those smaller communities that may not have the resources that
Yeah.
bigger ones do.
That's how it started for me, the education portion of this. And it was so much fun because the first hospital that really embraced this was Mescalero. And they timed it with their monthly staff meetings. So instead of their
Awesome.
staff meeting being an hour, their staff meeting was 2 hours. And the first hour was me. And it was really cool because we just met every month. I got to know everybody. There were a couple of times I actually went down and did an in person. It was
Very
just
cool.
an absolute blast because really got to know them and you could see the difference in their confidence to just say, I can approach this kid and I know what I'm doing. They're not second guessing themselves, which was just really cool.
Just seeing that growth in people, and I know you as an educator, that's what you live for. But just seeing that growth of going from the time where they're uncomfortable, unsure, to the point where you're like, okay, I got this. Peds
Yeah.
patient, no
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. That, unfortunately, with COVID and staffing, it's unfortunately fallen by the wayside a little because there's such a small facility at the moment. They just don't have the staff to participate at the minute.
Yeah.
But the facility that I've been working a lot with most recently is Northern Navajo up in Shiprock.
Okay.
And they're a very small community hospital. And they approached us, just to start with some education, but then they did the EMSC pediatric readiness a couple of years ago. So just before COVID. And they did their pediatric readiness score, and it was not good. I was already doing some education. They were already working on getting contracts for the telehealth so that we could do that aspect. And so we started working with them on their pediatric readiness score.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if you've looked at the pediatric readiness score. Some of it is something really simple. Do you have 24 gauge IVs? Do you have 22 gauge? The simplest stuff that is, okay, we can just go to brochure and order what we need. But then there were more complex things like, do you have a policy on how to give pediatric boluses?
One of the things that in looking at the PEDS readiness and having looked at the PEDS readiness survey, which comes out, I think it's every couple of years or something. It comes out.
Yeah, it's
Sal-
actually
Sally Snow would kill me for not knowing the answer to that. 'Cause she's the EMSC queen here in Texas. But when you look at that, it's very simple stuff, but it's all stuff that, like, if you don't have that, if you don't have those fundamental blocks of equipment, you can't take good care of patients. You can't take safe care of patients.
yeah.
So really, it's focused on making emergency departments, your average emergency department, a safe place for a pediatric patient.
Yeah. And we work with some other facilities as well, but I'm just in absolute awe of what Northern Navajo's done, because we started having monthly meetings and they would pick one thing on it, and we would work with them to either get them the equipment or help them with a policy or help them with the education. And then on top of that, we started doing my regular education with them, and then virtual mock codes.
Mock codes. Tell me a little bit about that, because I'm curious how that works.
I started with just basic scenarios, and then I would via Zoom show them a rhythm strip and say, okay, this is what your child's got, because we didn't have the technology down. But now there's actually an ASEP sim box, which is really cool. It has scenarios and videos, and they get the radio report and they have to prep, and then you have a video of actually what the child looks like, plus
Awesome.
the monitor showing you what it is. And on my end, I can control and move the monitor they do all the right things. So I can move the monitor so that they're no longer in SVT, or they don't do the right things, so I can keep it in SVT. So it's actually pretty cool. But they've now got so good at it, I still participate, but they're running mock codes monthly.
That's wonderful.
And they're just doing an amazing job. And their pediatric readiness score is now, I think the last one was 94 or 96 out of 100.
Wow. Holy cow.
Yeah. And
Talk about making an impact and creating a resource for the community. Wow. What a cool thing to do.
it is just amazing. And I do an echo, and we actually had the educator, Jordan, from Northern Navajo, do a talk on their pediatric readiness journey last month. And she was telling us about how they'd recently had this rollover with 5 children in.
Wow.
And it wasn't just the ER that kind of stepped in and did everything. The whole place just ran like a well-oiled machine. The call went out that these 5 kids were coming in, and like nurses from the floor came down to help care for the other patients, to free up the ER nurses. And Jordan was telling me that pre all of the education and support that we've done, they've had a similar event, and it was an emotional, chaotic mess because nobody knew where their equipment was or how to work it. And everyone was panicking because they weren't comfortable with children. And this time, she said it was just amazing. They all worked like the well-oiled machine and team that you really want. And like I said, they came down from other parts of the hospital to help so that the ER nurses could look after the really sick kids. And they ended up intubating and stabilizing and shipping 2 of them. And
Wow.
it was just really an amazing thing to hear that we've managed to have that kind of impact and improves the outcomes for these pediatric patients.
Wow. What a cool way to have an impact on your community. That's super cool, Sarah.
It was so nice to hear Jordan talk about how it all just went how it was meant to go because they've practiced, they've drilled, they've got that muscle memory because they do their mock codes every month and they've all
Yeah.
played with the equipment and it just went beautifully, which made my heart happy.
That's awesome. What a cool thing. What a cool thing to be able to do. And again, what an impact on not only the nurses and their practice, which is cool enough, but then just the impact that you're potentially having on the community
Yeah,
is incredible. Holy cow. What cool work you're doing.
and they're such a great team up there and they've been so receptive and engaged with everything we do. I mentioned about the echoes. Do you know what an echo is?
I do, but the audience may not all know. So tell them a little bit
Okay.
about the echoes.
So the idea is it's like a hub and spoke method of education and support. And the idea being that it started actually here at UNM regarding liver disease, but has now spread to so many other topics that you can't have a specialist in every community. But we do need that information and knowledge out there. So you have, when I do an echo, it's usually about an hour. And I facilitate them. I don't speak at all of them. But the idea is that you do about 20 minutes or half an hour of education on a topic, followed by a case study. And sometimes the case study is presented by the community without the specialist. And it becomes a discussion and an education about what you should do and how you should care for this patient. And the idea being that those that are on the echo are part of your learning community. So, me in a big rural center may be able to say, you should get the CT scan and the MRI and do this and do that. But in the middle of nowhere, when you don't have those resources, we could have someone at another small hospital that says, hey, we don't have that. And I tried this and this, and I managed to make that diagnosis or care for that patient.
Wow. That's cool.
So my echoes are, and they're not mine, but I call them mine, are around pediatric trauma. And it's part of a HRSA grant. And we do monthly echoes. And we actually now have listeners, participants, not just around the US. We have them in Spain and Italy, I think, with the last couple. So
That's
it's
cool.
cool that we're getting even further afield. But it's fun because you get to hear what's happening in other states and other facilities. So everybody learns and grows instead of it just being, we're the big university hospital, we're not necessarily doing the latest, greatest, and we're doing it with lots more resources than other places are. So you get to learn how to do it with less resources, or they might have just read the latest, greatest article that you haven't. And we all get to share that knowledge and experience.
I love that. That's super cool. What a cool way to, again, make sure that the community is ready. And that really helps the big center too, because like you mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned the ED nurse criticizing what's coming in from the community. If you're making the community better, it's going to make your job easier when you get that patient, which
Oh,
will
yeah.
eventually happen.
Yeah. And taking care of our kids. It's what I love about being a nurse, is making a difference, taking care of people.
Yeah, that's right.
And
What a
it's
cool
fun.
thing you're doing, Sarah. That's super awesome. Now you're also super involved in with the CPEN as well, and you do some stuff with the BCEN around their CPEN exam.
Yes.
Weren't you one of the first people that took the pilot of the CPEN way back?
You and I were both beta testers for that one.
The beta testing part is cool, but what wasn't cool is the months of not hearing whether or not you passed
Yeah.
it.
I think you and I both beta tested the CPEN and the TCRN.
Yep,
Oh.
I did beta. Let's see. I did the beta test for both because I did the
Yeah.
CPEN pretty early on. I may not have been a beta, but I was
No.
one of the first. I was one of the first. I think you were the first in New Mexico, and I think I was like the second.
There we go. We'll just keep following each other on that one. First
That's
and
right.
second. First
That's
and
right.
second.
That's right. That's right. So,
But I started as an item writer, and now I'm up with the exam construction committee. And it's just amazing. I don't think you realize how much work goes into making an amazing exam.
oh, having been at the working as a faculty member in both EMS and nursing, I can tell you it's a lot of work. It's not just throwing a bunch of questions and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, I'm mentoring a couple of new item writers, it's fun because they're writing these questions and we get to sit and talk about them and tweak them and make them so that the idea being that you're demonstrating your knowledge and experience, and you're demonstrating how fabulous you are and that you're the best of the best. And that's how I think of all of those, that you're demonstrating that you're the cream of the crop.
Yep.
And so making an exam and writing questions that they don't have to be hard. They just have to be able to tap into those bits of knowledge that you want that, in my case, the peds emergency nurse to know. And you're not going for the obscure stuff, because that would be ridiculous, because this is New Mexico. We have all kinds of obscure stuff.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. And one of the things that a lot of those exams are is they really focus on kind of bread and butter, like stuff that as a peds nurse you may see all the time, or as a
Yeah.
trauma nurse you may see all the time. And of course, there's some of those things that you don't see. Like I always remember seeing in the CEN exam, Black Widow spider bite.
Yeah.
Kind of question. And all my career, I think I've seen one
Blackfoot.
blue classic Black Widow bite. And I'll never forget, it was when I was almost done with my time at UNM. I think I was like getting ready to leave there. I was part-time still, working somewhere else, but it's still there part-time. And I think I was like almost out the door, getting ready to resign, or not long from being gone. And we had this trauma coming in, and they're like, yeah, we have this 3-car, 4-car pile up that we have all these patients coming into the trauma. They're like, do you want to go do the trauma, or you can go to the fast track area? And the fast track area has a Black Widow spider bite that they're getting ready to treat. And I was like, ooh, I want to do that because I've never done that. And I had a nursing student with me, and the nursing students, we could go do the trauma. And I was like, you'll see a million traumas in your career. I go, you're not going to see a whole lot of Black Widow spider bites. It's far more interesting. And they were like, I was like, You go hang out at the trauma. I'll go take care of the spider bite. I'm
Yeah,
like, been there, done that. I've done that a million times.
you don't realize. I didn't realize the weird stuff we see in New Mexico until I was in Anniston, Alabama for the FEMA training.
Oh, coolest training ever.
The best. And there I was doing live agent Cobra training. And we had to go into all these rooms, and there was the patient, and they're telling you the symptoms. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, this is anthrax. Oh, yeah, that's hantavirus. Oh, yeah, that's plague. And they're like, how do you know this? And where do you live? Because we don't want to go there.
Yep. That's funny. So, Sarah, the last question I always ask everybody, and I can't not ask you these questions. I got to ask the questions of 3 things. What are 3 things a new emergency nurse should always remember? And what are 3 things they can just forget?
Okay. The 3 things to forget, considering I'm now faculty at the College of Nursing, I have to throw out, you can forget nursing diagnosis and nursing care plans.
It's always like that's like always the top 10 of things to forget. Now,
Yeah.
as a nursing faculty member, I'm surprised you'd say forget that, but okay.
Yeah, they will stand in your stead, but you're never going to write them again. It's the critical thinking that they get you in that mindset, but you're never going to write a care plan again.
Yep.
The other thing that you can forget is looking cute in scrubs. Because
I look cute in my scrubs.
within 6 months, you're covered in like bleach stains, and they don't look cute anymore. And you give up on it.
That's really funny.
And the things to remember. Okay. We all make mistakes. Own them and grow from them.
It's great advice.
Because if a nurse tells you she's never made a mistake, she's lying. He or she is lying. Because you've walked into the wrong room with the meds. You may have not given them, but we've all done something along those lines. It may not have got to the patient, but we've all made mistakes.
100%.
The grass is not always greener. It's just different manure. You have to decide what flavor manure you want.
I feel like we had that conversation with somebody just the other day, and they were saying, this organization's not necessarily better than that organization. It's just what you can tolerate.
Yeah, it's what flavor of manure you fancy. And then as an educator, you never stop learning. Always ask questions. And if someone's asking you a question, remember it's coming from one of 2 places. Either they missed some information you have, or they have information you've missed.
Boy, I love that you include that part too, because I don't know how many times I've had, as an experienced nurse, I've had people ask me questions. I'm like, oh, I have no idea.
Yeah. Or when they're asking you a question, it's because they've just read that cool article.
Yeah.
And it says not to do this anymore. Or the patient actually opened up and told them a piece of information that you didn't have.
Yeah. Good point.
So always ask questions and don't be upset when people ask you questions.
So this has been cool to get a chance to talk a little bit about the kind of cool stuff you're doing and hear about you as a nurse. And I can't thank you enough for the impact you've had on my career. It certainly is palpable. And I look at as a brand new baby nurse and following you around and learning how
you were my little duckling.
That's right. Yes, I was for a long time. And I had the longest orientation because nobody was in a hurry. Like the staffing was pretty good. And they're like, hey, are you ready? Or I'm like, no, I think I need a little bit more time. And I'm like, are you ready? I think I need a little bit more time. Till finally they're like, no, you're done. We're done. Sarah's done with you. We're done. But I can't thank you enough for the impact you've had on my career. That certainly is. You've been an influence to me for sure. So
thank you. Thank you. Well, we've had quite a wild ride.
A wild ride. 100%. That's awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.